The line to Santa curled like a red ribbon along the polished tile, and the mall smelled the way December always smells. If you close your eyes, cinnamon pretzels, fake pine in the kiosks, the warm, sweet breath of hot chocolate, drifting out from a cafe where the barista wore antlers and a perpetually apologetic smile. Children squealed and burst into short bursts of song. An animatronic reindeer blinked too slowly and unnerved a baby. Somewhere a bell rang without rhythm. The speaker above the directory kept skipping on. "Have yourself a merry little," and stuttering on the word Mary, so it came out as mur, 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 like the mall itself couldn't quite commit. He stood behind the little girl for 10 minutes before he noticed the scuffs on her boots. It was a particular kind of scuff, inward, like the toes turned in when she walked. The left lace had been knotted with green ribbon. She wore a coat too thin for the snow melting off everyone else's shoulders, with a little snag under one sleeve where a patch had peeled back. Her hair was combed with the fierce attention that comes from small hands and a single plastic brush. She held a folded paper snowflake, bent and soft at the edges from being turned in her pockets all season long. He had a name, Daniel, but he'd been moving through the crowd all day as Dan, anonymous under a grey beanie, a thrift store peacoat that smelled faintly of cedar from his closet, and a scarf his assistant said made him look like a person who goes to farmers' markets. The disguise wasn't for fun. It was for listening. He did that once in a while, walked through the places his company owned, unannounced, unimportant, and tried to hear the complaints without the varnish that came when people knew he could fix something. He was very good at fixing problems with money. He was very, very bad at fixing anything with his hands. The little girl reached the front. The man in the red suit didn't have the belly for it, which made his padded middle sit too high. Still, he had the soft eyes of someone who says yes to every cookie offered by every child. "Ho, ho," he said, and it was not convincing, but it was kind. "What do you want for Christmas, sweetheart?" The girl leaned in quietly, so Dan did not mean to hear it. He did anyway. Her voice was a thin thread. "Santa," she said, "can you give my mom a job?" The mall did a strange thing. The fake snow in the centerpiece globe, which shook every hour on the hour, seemed to pause in the air. Even the bell, even the stuttering speaker. The girl's breath fogged and disappeared before anyone else's did. Santa's white eyebrows settled into a diagonal. "A job," he said softly. She says it's okay," the girl went on. "A rush now," like she was afraid of wasting his time. "She says we're fine, and that jobs are just hiding sometimes. But I think they're not hiding. I think they're gone. She used to do the windows she fumbled, at the fancy store, with the weird mannequins. With the birds, she made them. She's good. She makes things. She can fix, mostly she fixes time." Like, the girl looked down at the snowflake in her fist. "Clocks and watches too, like my grandpa's. But she says that's a hobby, not a... Anyway, I can help if that helps. I'm 9. I'm almost 9.5. Lucy," the elf helper said gently, reading her badge. But the girl didn't look at him. Dan felt something pull in his chest like stitches catching. Fixes time, he thought. The words unmooring things in the attic of his memory that he'd nailed up and painted over. The peacoat tightened across his shoulders. He adjusted the scarf. He saw, as if he'd stepped back, the too bright gloss of the tile, the sparkle of everything for sale. He had funded all this glitter. He had turned failing malls into community experiences. He had cut long fuses and watched them burn. He had posted banners that read "Coming soon," and behind them, shops he'd never see again folded quietly. For a second, he was a boy again in a kitchen, with a small square window, and a clock that ticked too loudly because the house was too quiet. And his mother's hands were chapped from the factory. And the watch his father had left behind had stopped at 3:17 on a Tuesday and never taken another breath. "Where's your mom now?" Santa asked. He had leaned forward, manner changed. The elf looked at the line with panicked eyes. The next child clutched a letter like an accusation. "She's at her other job." The girl glanced over her shoulder at the food court. as if she could see through the people, past the orange trays and the soda machines. She says it counts if you wipe down tables with your whole heart. But she's tired. Please don't tell her I told you. She gets embarrassed. Santa swallowed. I'll see what I can do, he said, and something about the way he said it made Dan believe him for half a breath. Then Lucy slid off Santa's knee, took the candy cane with perfunctory gratitude, and turned into the crowd, head ducked, moving with that inward-toed determination. Dan did not remember deciding. He just stepped forward, thanked Santa without meeting his eyes, and followed. The mall in December is a kind of river. You can let it carry you and blame it later. He hung back far enough that Lucy wouldn't feel a breath on her neck. He told himself ridiculous little lies, that he was going the same direction anyway, that he needed to find the restroom near the fountain, that he'd left his phone at the kiosk. But he knew what he was doing. He watched her thread through the corridor, where the tiled ceiling hung too low and amplified the hum of the lights. She passed a cart selling artisan candles in scents, like alpine whisper and bookstore dust, slowed to look at a spinning rack of winter hats, then kept going toward the bathrooms. No, past them, toward the double doors that led to the back hall, where mall scent turns to the less curated air of concrete and cleaning supplies. She pushed the door with both hands and disappeared into the colder, echoing light of the service hallway. He followed, suddenly self-conscious, who follows a child, and reached for a story in case someone stopped him. The stories always came easy to him. He built them to sell things, to save companies, to save himself. The back hall smelled like mopped floors and lemon. A radio played scratchy pop through someone's phone in a pocket. A man in a red apron hurried past with a tray of overflowing trash bags, a renegade string of tinsel dragging behind him like a comet tail. Lucy walked by a janitor's closet and knocked on the door the way you do when the door is actually an office, soft and familiar. It opened a sliver. A woman peered out, hair hastily braided, worry sewn onto her face in the tiny puckers between her brows. She was maybe 33, 35, with the careful posture of someone holding something together so it wouldn't shatter. "Hey, Bug," the woman said, and her face softened even as she kept her voice low. "You're back early. What happened?" "You didn't. Did Santa?" I asked, Lucy said. "I did it right." I didn't say the word desperate. The woman's shoulders sagged. She pushed the door open wider. Inside, Dan saw a mop sink, a line of blue uniforms hanging like empty people, a paper calendar with 3 months stacked. On the shelf above the sink, a cluster of little brass watch gears, a loop, a pair of tiny screwdrivers. His heart did that stitch pull again. "Come here," the woman said. "You're freezing." She pulled the girl into her chest, rubbed her shoulders briskly, then caught sight of him over Lucy's head. Her hands stilled. Her eyes sharpened, went alert. She shifted Lucy behind her in that one subtle motion every parent learns. "Can I help you?" she asked, cool, cautious. In that second, Dan saw that she was not fragile. She was steel with velvet pulled over it. He lifted his hands, palms out. "I'm sorry," he said, because he suddenly was. "I didn't mean to. I heard your daughter. In line, Santa line. The part where he should explain dropped out from under him. I have a watch," he blurted, which was true. "It's Someone once told me not to throw it away because nothing that beats stops for good, even if it thinks it has." He shrugged, aimless. He was always smoother than this. This was like finding out he'd forgotten his own language. "Would you look at it?" he finished lamely. "I can pay." He reached for it. It had been in his coat pocket all winter, wrapped in a ripped-off corner of a bank envelope for protection that did not protect. He carried it like some people carried a stone from a lake, for luck, for weight. It was his father's pocket watch, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with brass. The glass was cracked. He wasn't sure when that had happened. The back was engraved with initials that could have belonged to anyone, cropped in serif letters. The woman's eyes didn't move to the watch. They stayed on his face for a long 2 beats, measuring. "Mom," Lucy said softly, tugging her sleeve. "He's the man I told you about. The one who... he looks like he's I think he's okay. The woman glanced down at her daughter and almost smiled. Then she exhaled and finally looked at the thing in Dan's open palm. Her mouth softened. That's not. She stopped, pressed her lips together. That's not a cheap, sentimental knockoff, he said, voice altered. That's a Hamilton. Railroad grade, maybe. People used to set whole towns by watches like that. She reached for it, and he had the sudden sensation of handing off a living creature to someone who knew exactly where to put her fingers. I'll look, she said, no promises. Then, looking back up, she added, it's $50 if it's something simple, $200 if it's not. $300, he said quickly. She raised a brow. Her hand closed around the watch. Up close, Dan could see neat scars on her fingers, white slivers where blades had glanced. You don't negotiate yourself up, she said dryly. I do, he murmured. It's a flaw. Right, she said, skeptical in a way that landed like a joke. Okay, stranger. Give me till tonight, I've got a shift. I'll be in the food court at 6. We can meet by the weird pretzel mural. 6, he said. And don't follow my kid again, she added. The warmth gone. Please, He swallowed a defense he could justify because every defense sounded like a lie eventually. I won't. He turned to go, but behind him Lucy's small voice lifted. Sir, he pivoted. Yes, she held out her hand. In it lay the folded paper snowflake. Up close it was intricate, not the kind you cut from memory, but the kind you draft with a pencil first. Tiny anchors and bridges keeping islands from falling. You can borrow it, she said. So you won't forget. He took it. It weighed less than anything he owned and more than everything. Thank you, he said. He was surprised by the rasp in his own voice, like rust being sanded away. I won't forget. He was almost at the end of the service corridor, almost back to where the mall air felt nice again, when a security guard stepped around the corner. He was young, chin-freckled, hair too short even for the job. Sir, he said, easy enough. Quick question. Sure, Dan said. He stuck his hands into his pockets, found only the paper snowflake where the watch had been, and realized too late how it looked. In his other pocket, his fingers brushed the edge of a legal envelope he'd shoved there in the morning, the top half peeking up. Acquisition Summary, North Pine Commons. He folded it down quickly. Everything okay? The guard asked, looking past him toward the janitor's closet where the woman was now hidden by a cracked door. Everything is, Dan began. Then Lucy appeared again, breathless, as if she'd run and changed her mind. She trotted up to him with so much urgency the guard stepped aside. Wait, she said, and her cheeks were apple red from cold and running and something like hope. I forgot to tell you the most important thing. He crouched without thinking. What's that? She held up the watch he thought was in the woman's pocket, and he realized she'd slipped it back to him somehow. The way kids can pickpocket kindnesses back into your hands without you noticing. Santa's not magic, she said, very serious. But people sometimes are. He stared at the brass circle, and all at once felt his throat close. Her eyes flicked to the thin white scar at the base of his hand, the one he'd gotten at 14 helping his mother pry open a jar by tapping a butter knife along the lid. Also, she added, as if it were an afterthought, Mom can really fix this. She's fixed worse. She fixed a cuckoo clock where the bird didn't want to come out anymore. I will absolutely pay $300, he said, because he couldn't think of anything else that didn't sound like a promise he wasn't ready to make. The guard nodded like he'd seen what he needed. Have a good one, he said, and turned away. Dan slid the watch back into his pocket. He almost said goodbye. He didn't. He walked away into the fountain noise, his heart beating that old watch's stubborn rhythm. Not time exactly, but memory knocking on pipes. At 6, the mall would sweeten into evening. Lights dimmed to make things look expensive. He would meet them by the pretzel mural and say something rehearsed that wouldn't fit the moment. He could feel it already. He would say, I'm Dan, when he should say I'm sorry, or I'm here, or nothing at all. On the escalator up, he looked over the railing and saw her again, Lucy by a column swinging a leg, counting tiles. The woman, her mother, stepped out of the closet with a grey cardigan on over her uniform shirt. She tucked a small toolkit into her tote, and he saw the handle of a loop like a seashell. He turned, about to step aside to watch without being seen, when his phone buzzed with a name he could never ignore. He pulled it out, looked, and the world of food courts and candy canes wavered as the world of boardrooms and stacked agendas crashed back like surf. It was his general counsel. A text, "It's done. Papers signed. North Pine closes at midnight." He glanced down at the envelope with the acquisition summary. He had carried it into the mall because he wanted the weight of it, the responsibility of it, to ache. He thought penance was a feeling. He thought you could hold guilt like a thing in your pocket, and it would balance a scale somewhere. North Pine Commons, this mall. He shut his eyes. The escalator hummed under his shoes. He let the phone slide back against his hip, and in that small private dark he heard the last thing Lucy had said. People sometimes are. He opened his eyes and saw them in the reflection of a store window. Lucy, the mother, him holding a paper snowflake like a borrowed star. And then the mother's head lifted, eyes cutting through the crowd, and she saw him seeing her, and something like recognition and irritation crossed her face at once. Her eyes dipped to the edge of the envelope in his pocket as he stepped off the escalator. She had read a lot of things in her life. She could read crisis at 100 feet. Her gaze snapped back up. She took a breath like someone about to step into cold water. And then, as the speaker overhead tried to say Mary and failed, she said, quietly, like a person who already knew the ending to the story, "North Pine closes at midnight." No breath, no buffer, just the 6 words chewing up the shiny December light. Dan's mouth opened, empty of the right shapes. He'd prepared lies, and they tasted like pennies. He started, then stopped because her face didn't want an argument. It wanted the truth like a surgeon wants light. "You're one of them," she said. "Not cruel, just precise. The men with the papers," he swallowed. "One of them," he admitted. His instinct to soften things flared. "But not, we're restructuring, not closing." He could hear himself sliding into the language of press releases. He shut his eyes for half a heartbeat and forced the words back into their bones. "It's complicated," he said, "and I'm not hiding. I was. I'm trying to listen." Her hand went to Lucy's shoulder. "We've had enough listening," she said quietly. "We could use some doing." "I brought the watch," he blurted, ridiculous and earnest at once, as if a broken circle of brass could serve as a passport into her life. He held it out. "If you still," she looked at it. He saw the movement in her throat as she swallowed, like the pennies in his own mouth had changed to ice in hers. "Give me an hour," she said. "Bring me coffee, black." He nearly tripped over his eagerness. "From?" She tilted her head toward the cafe with the antlered barista. "There. Tell them it's for Mara, and..." She paused. "Tell them to put it on my tab." "You have a tab?" he asked before he could stop himself. She smiled without teeth, which is a thing some people use like armor. "I have a face they trust," he said. "Hurry before the pretzel mural closes." He went. He moved fast because he wanted to do one thing right, even if it was small. In line at the cafe, he felt people, things pressing on all sides, a baby on a hip with one sock, a man in a sweater muttering a list into his phone, the bright poster board of a fundraiser for a high school choir. The drink board was a chalk miracle. He stared at it blankly. "Hi," said the barista in antlers. "What can I start?" "2 coffees," he said. "Black, for Mara, on her tab. And, take this." He handed over his card. The barista shook his head. "We don't do new tabs," he said, and his eyes flicked toward a side shelf where a little notebook lay with names and tallies. She carries it and pays like a few bucks when she can. It's not a..." He grimaced. "This is going to sound dumb, but it's a kindness economy." Dan tasted the words. He liked them. He envied a world where that could be the answer. "Okay," he said slowly. "Then put mine there too. I'll owe you." Antler sighed, then smiled. "That's how it works," he said. "Name it Dan," he said, and it felt like the first true thing he'd said all day. When he returned with the cups, Mara was sitting on the floor against the janitor's closet door with a rolling toolbox open like a picnic basket. The loop hugged her eye. Lucy sat cross-legged, eating a pretzel she'd somehow conjured, breath-puffing little flower clouds. The watch lay gutted between them, its pieces like a tiny county fair disassembled and waiting for men with wrenches. "Okay," Mara said, not looking up. "It's a 992, maybe 992B, railroad grade. The spring's tired, it's not broken, it's discouraged." "I know the feeling," Dan said, and immediately wanted to take it back because it sounded performative. But Mara just huffed under her breath, something like reluctant agreement. His phone buzzed again with a message he didn't open. He could see the top of it. "We go public at 8. He glanced at Lucy, who was watching him with the harmless scrutiny of a kid whose curiosity hadn't learned shame. She whispered, "Do you have a kid?" He shook his head, mouth too tight for words. Lucy nodded like that explained something. She took another bite of pretzel, then leaned toward the watch parts with reverence. "It looks like a tiny city," Lucy said. "It is," Mara murmured. "And all the streets have to agree or the bus won't come." Then catching herself, she smiled with the same soft surprise a person has at hearing her own laugh. She held out the loop. "Want to see?" Lucy's eyes widened. Dan reached for the loop before he could think himself out of it. He brought it to his eye and the whole world exploded into detail. Dust motes as planets, metal as landscape, fingerprints as storms. He had never liked seeing things too close. He liked outlines, he liked maps, but this, he swallowed against unexpected heat behind his eyes. He handed the loop back. "Sorry," he said, and he didn't know what he was apologizing for. "Don't be," Mara said. "Apologies are like stickers. Use too many and they stop sticking." At exactly 6:47, she set the pieces back into place. She pressed the backplate with her thumbs, satisfied by the quiet click. The second hand stuttered. It found a rhythm like a heart calming after a sprint. He felt the hairs rise along his forearms. "It's not perfect," she said. And it sounded like she meant more than the watch. "It's 5 minutes slow. On purpose. Why?" "So you can have 5 minutes to think before you decide something stupid," she said simply. "My mentor used to do that for his customers who couldn't slow down. He said it saved marriages, but what he meant was it saved dignity." Here, she placed it in his palm. The brass warmed his skin almost instantly. 300. No, 250. The spring wasn't as cranky as I thought. He didn't move to pay. He felt like he should bring out the envelope in his pocket and tear it in half and throw it in the fountain. He felt like he should stand up in the food court and confess he had let a building become a spreadsheet because he forgot how to hear the sound a mall makes when it is someone's city. He felt like he should run. Instead, he said, "Come to my office tomorrow. 10 a.m., bring a list of what you need to." He stopped, recalibrated. "What do you want to do?" He surprised himself with the question. Mara looked at him, and in that second he saw the whole person. The tired and the fierce, the proud and the practical. The part of her that could braid a daughter's hair on a moving bus. The part that could palm a tiny screw and not lose it even if someone shouted. The part that used humor like a match. He braced for a no. He braced for a yes, and the way it would upend everything he'd done this year. "I want a bench," she said quickly, as if she'd been carrying this answer around and it was worn soft by being taken out and folded back. "I want a clean bench and light and a place for people to come with their broken time and sit while I try to coax it back. I want to put a little sign in the window that says we mend things that tick. I want to teach teenagers how to hold tools without fear. I want my kid to see me do a thing I'm good at and not just a thing that pays." He hadn't realized he was holding his breath. He let it go slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He nodded, as if to persuade himself. "We can. The North Pine Plan." He bit the sentence in half. He needed those 5 slow minutes. He thought of the watch in his hand like a small animal getting braver. He thought of the email he hadn't opened. He thought of the barista with antlers and a notebook of tabs and the word kindness written in the corner like a dare. "I can make space," he said. "Even if other things shift, I want to." Lucy leaned on her mother's arm and whispered something. Mara smiled down and nodded. She looked back up at him. "You're saying this because it's Christmas," she said, skeptical, playful, protecting herself with tone. "I'm saying it because I owe a lot of strangers more than apologies," he said. It came out too fast. He winced at his own earnestness. "And because it's Christmas, yes," he added, and she huffed that little almost laugh again. "Tomorrow," she agreed. 10. "We'll see if we like each other in daylight." He could have stayed, stretched this quiet into something like the beginning of trust. But the phone in his pocket buzzed again, this time insistent, and when he glanced at the screen, the preview grabbed him by the collar. Media leak, story running at 9. North Pine slated for closure. His mouth dried. He looked at Mara. He looked at Lucy, who was building a tower out of napkin dispensers. He looked at the watch and the 5 slow minutes he'd just bought. "Something's wrong," he said, and he hated how small his voice sounded. Mara's eyes narrowed. "What are the—" He gestured toward the ceiling, where cameras like black gnats hovered at the corners. "Someone leaked. It's going public tonight. People will panic. Stores. It's going to be ugly." Mara's face did that still thing again, that careful, calm children trust. "Then stay," she said. "If it's your mess, be here when it sloshes over." He nodded before his own habit could make him nod after an exit. He went to the fountain where families posed in front of a fiberglass polar bear and called his general counsel. "Hold the line," he said. "Don't say closure, say reimagining. Say, no, don't spin it. Tell them we're going to open our doors to local vendors for the next 6 months. No rent for first month. Pop-up spaces, holiday markets. Tell them the old clock repair shop." He turned, found Mara's eyes, found the words, "is reopening as of tomorrow. Under our sponsorship. Apprenticeships. No more glossy language. Just say we forgot what a mall was for and we're going to try again." There was a long silence on the other end. "Daniel," his counsel said slowly, "that will cost—" "I know what it'll cost," he said. "Please do it. You're asking me to change strategy that a board approved 48 hours ago." "I'm telling you," he said quietly. His voice had found bedrock. "Put it in my name." Mara watched him and did not smile. But something in her softened the difference between ice and glass. He hung up. His hands shook. He wanted to be sick. He wanted to sleep for a week. He wanted to put the watch against his ear and listen to the tiny life inside. He took a step toward Mara and Lucy. The speaker above them leapt into a different song. Carol of the bells, urgent and relentless, a hammer in a pretty glove. There are nights when a town passes the rumor from palm to palm so fast it becomes heat. By 8:35 you could feel it. People stood in tighter clusters. Eyes darted upward to the screens where, between ads for handled mugs and oversized teddy bears, headlines began to crawl. North Pine slated for closure. Jobs at risk. Restructuring loomed. By 8:47, a group of shop employees gathered by the fountain in their branded polos. Faces pale with the way fluorescent light turns everyone into a version of bad news. The mall manager, a man with a tie like a traffic cone, climbed up on a fake snowdrift and begged for calm in a voice that sounded like he'd never been calm in his life. A teenage boy in a hoodie shouted, "You can't just," and his voice cracked with something bigger than his sentence. By 8:51, a woman in a jewelry kiosk began to cry quietly behind a glass case of tiny, perfect things that had taken her all week to arrange just so. At 8:58, the mall Santa, padding now deflated in a back corridor, flicked off his beard with the air of a person who had carried a village on his face and was tired. His name was Art, though no one called him that on the job. He hung the beard, wiped the glue from his lip, stood in the dim light with his hat in his hands, and heard the murmur rising like storm water. Dan stood next to Mara as if proximity could make him brave. Lucy had her hand wound around 2 of his fingers, not like a child clinging, but like someone checking the pulse of a machine. He saw the mall as a map again, and he hated the map for a breath because it smoothed out the bumps that made the place human. He climbed onto the fake snowdrift. "Hey," he called, and his voice didn't carry, so someone handed him a megaphone, the kind that makes anyone sound like a fire drill. "Hey," he said again, lungs remembering how to fill. "My name is Daniel Rowe." A sigh rolled through the crowd like someone had taken off a tight shoe. "Yes," he said, "those headlines are about decisions my company made." He swallowed. The plastic edge of the megaphone touched his lip. I was wrong. The sentence cost him something. You could feel it. The air changed shape. "We bought this place to fix it," he said. "We told ourselves we were helping. We forgot to ask you what help looked like." "That's on me," a murmur. The mall manager stared at him with eyes that said, "You just set my desk on fire." "No one's closing tonight," Dan said. "No one's being forced out. Not now. We're reopening applications for short-term leases at reduced or zero rent for locals who want to bring," he fumbled, "real things in. Food, repair, crafts, music. We're going to make space for kids to learn jobs that don't involve ringing up plastic. We're going to spend the money we said we didn't have to do the thing we forgot we could do, which is be a town square." He exhaled, shaky. "And if you're already here and scared, come see us. We'll figure it out. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to show up and yell if we mess this up again." He lowered the megaphone. His cheeks felt feverish. He expected shouts. He expected someone to throw a pretzel. Instead, there was a long, strange quiet, and in it someone clapped once. Loud, decisive. It was the barista with antlers. It sounded lonely until the second clap came, then the third. Then the noise was a wave that knocked some people off balance and washed others clean. He glanced sideways at Mara. Her eyes were glassy and hard at once. "You're good at speeches," she said, and the good sounded as dangerous as a compliment can sound. "I'm better at writing checks," he said. "I will write them. Then write one to the woman at the jewelry kiosk first," Mara said. "She doesn't know how she's going to buy gas." "Okay," he said, and meant it. That's when the mall Santa Art stepped around the corner out of the dim corridor, beard in his hand like a flag of surrender. He looked at Mara and stopped in a way that made the world tilt. "Mara," he said, voice hoarse. "Ma." She went very still, bizarre. Her hand tightened involuntarily on Lucy's shoulder. Lucy looked up and then back at the man with the bare upper lip and the eye crinkles that looked like the fine spider cracks in the watch glass. "Our time," Mara said slowly, like trying a key in a lock gone stiff. "What are you?" He rubbed his mouth as if that would put the beard back on. "Didn't know you were here." He looked at Lucy and something broke in his face like ice giving way in spring. "She looks like..." He stopped. "You never called me back," he blurted, and immediately winced at the accusation, drowning the tenderness. Mara's throat worked. "I didn't know what to say," she said. "You left when..." "I left before it got bad because I was scared," he said, fast. I know. I can't." He put a hand to his chest. "I'm sorry, kid. The last word wasn't for Lucy. It was for Mara." Dan stood between them, stupidly holding a megaphone that had gone quiet, holding a pocket watch that had learned to breathe again. He felt acutely that he was incidental and then horribly that he was not incidental at all. The paper snowflake in his pocket crinkled as if to say, "Pay attention." He tried to. "Who is he?" Lucy asked, voice small. Mara didn't look at Dan. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at her daughter, and her face rearranged around truth. "He's my brother," she said, and as the word landed, Dan saw it. Same mouth, same stubborn cleft in the chin. "He's your uncle." And then, as if the universe had been waiting for the exact worst moment to show its teeth, a sharp sound cracked across the mall. Not a gunshot, not glass, something quieter, meaner, the click of handcuffs tightening. 2 security guards, one the freckled kid from the corridor, stood with a third who was older, eyes hard with protocols that had kept him from losing his job. The older one had a hand on someone's shoulder, and the someone was Art. The beard in his fist looked ridiculous now, like evidence of bad judgment. "Sir," the older guard said firm, "there have been reports of a theft from the jewelry kiosk." He looked at the woman crying behind the glass. "We need to ask you some questions." Art's face did a complicated thing. He held his hands up like a man who had been through this posture too many times. "I didn't." He started, and then shut his mouth as if the words had never helped before. Mara stepped forward. "No," she said, voice low and dangerous. "He didn't." The older guard didn't look at her. "Ma'am, please, I know him," she insisted. "He steals stupid jokes. He steals napkins." "He doesn't." "Ma'am." "Stop calling me ma'am," she snapped, and her face flushed and Lucy flinched because even brave voices can scare kids. "Please," Dan said to the guard, stepping between them. The older guard met Dan's eyes and didn't flinch. He had the look of a man who'd lost the habit of picking favorites at work. "And you are Daniel Rowe," Dan said. Because the time for pretending he was nobody was over, and anyway the pretending had burned up in the speech, the guard's eyebrows shot up. The crowd's noise shifted into a different key. "Then you can come with us, Mr. Rowe," the guard said, not cowed. "If you're vouching for him." "I am," Dan said, without the safe if. "Great," the guard said brusquely. "Then you won't mind." He didn't finish, because the jewelry kiosk woman, new mascara already spidering, rushed forward holding a velvet tray. "Stop," she said, words tumbling. "It wasn't him. I found the earring. I dropped it in the tissue paper drawer." She looked at Art. "I'm sorry." She gestured wildly. "Tonight," the guard exhaled. He took his hand off Art's shoulder slowly. The younger guard, the freckled one, looked like someone had removed a weight from his chest. Art lowered his arms with the ginger awkwardness of someone who always expects the second blow. "Okay," Dan said, dizzy with relief and adrenaline and the old exhaustion of December. "Okay, but relief like time is a slippery thing." The megaphone at his side squawked with feedback. The big screen over the polar bear flipped to a new headline: "Rowe Group accused of stunt as North Pine rumors swirl." The photo they'd chosen was him at a gala last year. Tuck's crisp smile tight. It looked like a different species of person. The article preview scrolled. The sources suggest optics manipulation, community backlash, and somewhere his phone started vibrating like a hive. Mara's eyes were on the screen, her mouth pressed thin. He felt the shift, small but seismic, the way trust can wobble before it falls. He knew about this wobble. He had caused it in others. He looked at her and thought, not for the first time, that he did not know how to be a good man in public. It was easier in small rooms, with broken things in your palm. "Tomorrow at 10, he said, trying to catch her gaze and hold it like a fragile object. "Please, I don't know," she said, and the words slid under his skin like cold. "I don't know if I want to be a headline." "I'll keep you out of it," he said too quickly. "People like you," she said, not bitter, just bone-tired. "Don't get to promise that." Before he could answer, Lucy tugged her sleeve. "Mum," she whispered, "we need to go. The bus." Mara nodded. She looked at Dan like someone measured a dress on a hanger and couldn't decide if it would rip at the seams. "We're on the late route," she said. "We missed this one. We're walking." "I can," he started. "No," she said sharply. "No rides, pride, but also safe. Rules you make when the world has hands." He took the watch out of his pocket and pressed it into her palm. "Hold this," he said. "Please, bring it tomorrow. Don't decide yet." She looked down at the brass circle. Her fingers closed around it like a reflex. "Okay," she said softly, surprising both of them. He watched them go, Lucy's green ribbon bouncing at her ankle. Art hovered awkward, rubbing his wrist where the guard had touched it. "You don't remember me," he said to Dan, which made no sense, and then, before Dan could ask, he added, "You bought the building where I used to fix jukeboxes." The reimagining meant drywall where music used to be. He offered his hand for a shake like a peace offering. "Art Mendoza." Dan shook it. The name landed somewhere familiar and wouldn't sit. I know," Art said, not unkindly. "You're the man with all the time in his hands." "I'm the man who loses it," Dan said. Art smiled crooked. Maybe hold on to that kid's paper snowflake, he said, in case you forget who you were tonight. He started to step away, then paused and glanced at Mara disappearing into the crowd. She was always the one who could see the piece that didn't fit, he said. Even when it was a person, he lifted 2 fingers to his brow in a half salute and faded into the same dim corridor he'd come from. Dan stood in the weirdness after the storm. The way a mall never looks more like a city than after panic flattens, and people decide to get on with the business of being alive. He was collecting himself when his phone lit up again, and this time he opened the message because it had 3 words and a name he hadn't read in years. From unknown subject, "Body, you owe me. Hail, hail." The name hit like a dropped tool. Old partner, old debt. 10 years ago, they had built an empire out of other people's buildings. And then they had cracked it down the middle, in a split people in suits still whispered about when they thought the bartender wasn't listening. Hale had always known the soft places under Dan's ribs. The message pulsed on the screen, aggressive in its brevity. "You owe me." He looked up at the big screen with his tuxedo grin printed giant and false. He looked at the paper snowflake in his pocket like a folded map to a better version of himself. He looked at the spot where Mara had been and felt a familiar itch under his skin. The sense that time, despite his best efforts, was pulling him somewhere he hadn't intended to go. "Tomorrow at 10, he had said. "Tomorrow at 10. He whispered into the holiday noise, as if making a small vow to the air itself. "I'll be there." Then, just as his lips closed around the last word, the mall lights flickered, dimmed, and went out. A collective noise rose, a laugh, a gasp, a groan. The emergency lights glowed up from the floor like low moons. In the sudden hush, the giant clock hanging over the atrium, a decorative piece he'd always hated because it didn't actually work, started to tick. The sound was subtle, like a mouse behind a wall. People didn't notice at first. They noticed the dark. They noticed the emergency exit signs blooming red, and the way the fake snow drifted more convincingly in the low light. They noticed, because humans always notice, their own faces in the glossy windows, disembodied and a little haunted. Then a kid said, "Do you hear that?" and pointed up. The clock over the atrium, ornamental, intentionally frozen at 12:00 like a permanent New Year's, ticked again. Dan's scalp prickled. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the paper snowflake, half expecting his skin to draw blood on the tiny stitch cuts. The generator hummed to life, a long exhalation through the ducts, and the overhead lights came back in hesitant thirds. The big clock ticked a 3rd time, then a 4th, then settled into the same dogged rhythm as the watch in Mara's pocket. People clapped, not because of the clock, but because humans clap for life. Dan looked at the atrium clock with that wary affection you reserve for a relative who has a knack for bad timing and grand gestures. "Old thing wasn't wired anyway," the mall manager muttered next to him, trying on indignation to cover his unease. "Must be, I don't know, a prank or a reminder," said a voice behind them. It was Art again. Beard less, hat off, hair in the disarray of an evening that had insisted on itself. He squinted up at the clock, then at Dan. "You're going to like the story that gets told about this," he said, "even if it's nonsense." "We didn't do it," Dan said, which sounded noble and also defensive. "I mean, I didn't." Art shrugged. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Stories beat facts for dinner most nights. You know that." They stood a second in the shared strangeness. Someone started singing Silent Night in a thin but valiant soprano, and a handful of people joined. And half the harmonies were wrong, and it was weirdly beautiful in the way only ordinary bravery is. Dan turned his head to catch the note, and beyond the singing, caught sight of Lucy and Mara at the far end of the atrium, moving fast, trying to catch the bus. Relief flared, there they were, and then shrank, because they were small in the crowd, and the crowd had begun to move like a tide. "Stay here," he said to no one, and stepped into the stream, using the old trick of angling slightly against the current so you move forward without looking like you're fighting. He reached them just as they hit the exit doors. "Hey," he said, breath fogging. Let me. I'm not here to. Words failed again. He pointed at the night beyond the glass. Snow had started. Not the pretty kind that falls in confetti, the kind that comes in at a slant like a reprimand. Mara looked at him, then at the weather, then at Lucy, whose face had gone white with the thrill of small danger. Mara made the choice mothers make 100 times a day. Okay, she said. One ride before he could celebrate, she put a finger in his face. No detours. No addresses you think I should know. No speeches, she hesitated a beat, and no money in my coat while I'm not looking. I will find it and mail it back, and you will be embarrassed at the post office. He bit a smile. Deal. They crossed the slick tile to the parking deck. The cold came down the stairwell like a physical force. His car, a black thing that tried not to be ostentatious and failed, stood in the corner under a failed light. He opened the back door for Lucy. She slid in and immediately held her hands up to the vents, face blooming red again, as heat found her. Mara sat in front, hands on her knees, as if gripping them would keep her from bolting. What's the address? He asked, starting the engine, the car purring like it knew it was expensive. Rose Street, Mara said, 9th block, the one with the mural of the woman with the giant blue hair. I know it, he said, and he did, because he used to drive neighborhoods at night, telling himself he was getting the lay of the land, when what he was really doing was trying to remember he came from them. They moved through a city that was 2 cities stacked, a holiday map on top, lights and wreaths and inflatable snowmen, and under it a grid of real life, with dark windows and corner stores and buses leaning too hard into stops. Lucy narrated from the back seat like a sports announcer with add-ons. That bodega has the nice cat. He sits on the chip bags. Mr. Alvarez says he pays rent in headbutts. That church gives out food on Wednesdays, but not if you're late. She paused. Sometimes we're late. Lucy, Mara said softly. It's okay, Lucy said. He should know. He doesn't understand late. He understands other words. He understands. What do you call those big folders? Portfolios, Dan supplied. Portfolios, Lucy said, satisfied. But he doesn't understand late buses, and when you miss the food it feels like you messed up time. Dan gripped the wheel. You're right, he said. I don't, but I want to. Mara glanced at him, skeptical and weary, and then unexpectedly amused. That's either the best or worst thing you said tonight, she said. They turned onto Rose Street. The mural of the blue-haired woman looked damp and slightly feral in the snow. The building was one of those brick rectangles. The city built all in a row 30 years ago when officials used the word revitalize a lot. The lobby smelled like warm dust and someone's dinner. They climbed past a stack of packages in the corner and the mangled remains of a plastic wreath. On the 3rd floor, Mara's keys stuck. She jiggled it, swore under her breath, jiggled again. Hold your breath, she told the door. It opened. The apartment was clean in that careful way that betrays a war against chaos. Tidy piles, a line of boots by the door, a couch whose cushions had been smoothed into compliance. On the wall above a small table hung a homemade shadow box of watch parts arranged like a galaxy. The kitchen smelled like bread that would have been good if it hadn't tried to be dinner for 2. Sorry about... Mara started, gesturing vaguely at the space, at the way the couch leaned, at the way the lampshade cocked like a curious dog. He searched for the word that wasn't cozy, which felt like a slap. Alive, he said finally. You can tell the things got used. Mara's mouth twitched. That's one way to say poor, she said. The sting in it surprised even her. She scrubbed a hand over her eyes. Sorry, it's been I deserve that, he said softly. Lucy bounded to the table, where a small toolbox sat open on a towel. She dug around like a squirrel, then came up triumphant with a tiny screwdriver. Mom, she said, you left your favorite. She handed it over with solemn ceremony. Mara took it, voice thick. Thanks, Bug. Dan stood awkwardly, coat still on, suddenly unsure where his hands belonged in a place where everything had a job. He pointed at the shadow box. That's beautiful, he said honestly. Practice, Mara said, and something to look at when the check doesn't come. And you start writing the story where you will always be in this room. And the clock on the stove will always blink 12:0, because you forgot where the manual went. Everything pitched slightly then. The room, the air, the snow outside lifting in a sudden gust. The sound took a second to resolve, like it came down the hall through other people's walls before it made theirs vibrate. Sirens. Not the urgent high-needle kind, the lower, steadier kind that doesn't announce a single tragedy, but the kind of trouble that spreads. Gas leak, electrical. The power flickered, came back, flickered again. Mara and Dan looked at each other, stupid prey alert. Lucy, who'd been halfway to the bedroom for pajamas, stopped and tilted her head like a fox. The hallway lights outside clicked off. The apartment went very dark and then very light, because their window faced the building across the narrow back lot, and fire truck lights had started to paint the bricks. Red, blue, red, blue. Someone shouted in the hall. The word evacuate came in ragged pieces through the cheap door. They were out under the mural 3 minutes later, coats half on, Lucy's backpack slung over both shoulders, the little shadow box under Mara's arm, as if she could only bring one art piece from her life, and this had to be it. The snow had decided to become itself. It went straight for faces, straight for eyes. Firefighters hustled people out of the building next door, the older one with the bowed roofline that had leaked for a decade. The smell hit then. Hot metal, a sour tang that wasn't panic but something like it. Above them, smoke made the world smaller. Not ours, Mara breathed into her scarf, trying to stitch calm into Lucy's shaking shoulders. Next building. Just be smart. Hold. She reached for Dan's sleeve without deciding to. He let her grip held steady. Anyone else? A firefighter shouted into the dark mouth of the stairwell. Miss Alvarez, Lucy piped up, voice immediately too loud. She's old. She lives on 2, with the birds. I'll get her, Mara said, and before anyone could stop her, she started up the stairs. Dan grabbed her arm. No, he said, more harshly than he'd meant. Let them. She doesn't answer for strangers. Mara snapped Yanjing free. She's scared of uniforms. She looked at the nearest firefighter and said, 205. I won't be stupid. Then she went, because some people are built that way and can't help it. Stay, Dan told Lucy, which was the most useless command in human language, and bolted after Mara, calling her name into the heat and the stutter of a light that was trying for something like order. The hallway was a breathless line of doors, numbers peeling. Smoke slithered along the ceiling like an animal denied full transformation. By 2A, the heat had curled the paint like fingers. By 2B, a shadow moved behind rippled glass, a parakeet. Lucy hadn't lied. He pounded on 205. Miss Alvarez, he shouted. It's Mara. It's me. A chain slid. A voice thin and furious. I told you. The door cracked. A small woman with an iron-gray braid and 2 birds on her shoulder peered out, coughing. I smell, senor. Senor, we have to go, Mara said, coughing, eyes watering. Now, my son, Miss Alvarez said, disoriented, reaching for a picture frame on the little table just inside. His face, I'll get it, Dan said, and stepped in without thinking, hand over his mouth, which is useful for nothing. He grabbed the first frame his eyes landed on, boy in a graduation cap, and something else, small and shining at the edge of the table that his brain catalogued without consciously deciding. A medallion in a watch case, the hinge busted, face faded. He shoved both into his coat, took Miss Alvarez's elbow, and together, coughing and swearing and half laughing, because sometimes that's what your breath does on the way out of a building, they made it into the cold. Outside, Lucy vibrated in place, fists jammed into her pockets, wool hat crooked. When she saw them, she made a noise that was not a word and not a sob and not a laugh, but all 3. She flung herself at Mara and then, mortified by her own relief, stepped back and said too loudly, You smell like hot dogs. Thanks, Mara said, voice wrecked. That's the winter perfume. The firefighters contained the trouble with the efficient ballet of people who practice emergencies for a living. The building coughed smoke for a long time. Neighbors arranged themselves in awkward clusters under the mural and shivered. Someone brought out a thermos the size of a small child and poured tiny white cups of sweetness that burned down to the stomach like armor. By the time the worst was over, the world had that post-storm clarity where every light is too bright and every noise feels like a decision. The building next door would lose 2 apartments to water and stubborn heat. Mara's apartment had smoke in its hair now, and the couch would carry it forever. But they could go back in the morning. Not tonight. Not with the heat system confused, and the power jittery and Lucy standing up too straight against the instinct to crumple. "Hotel," Dan said gently, already raising his phone. "My treat." "No," Mara said reflexively, then saw Lucy's face, the way bravery was making her cheeks stiff, and exhaled through her nose. "Okay," she said. "One night. I pay you back." "Deal," he said. He would have agreed to anything that got them into a place with a clean pillow. In the hotel lobby, heat hit like a hug you didn't know you wanted. The carpet was bland in a way that money mistakes for soothing. The night manager looked at Dan, then at the soot-streaked trio behind him, and her posture softened. "Rough night," she said. And when Mara rolled her eyes like a yes, the manager slid a keycard across without asking for an extra deposit. Kindness, economy. The room had 2 beds and a painting of a sailboat in pastels that had never seen wind. Lucy leapt onto a mattress with the fully embodied joy only kids and dogs can sustain after drama. She bounced once, then remembered herself. Sat cross-legged at the foot like a monk. Dan stood at the threshold. He was a man who could buy the building and sell the beds and forget to sleep. He looked like a person who had wandered away from the master class and gotten lost in the beginner's workshop. I'll go," he said, feeling like he had to apologize for existing in a 6-by-8-foot rectangle of carpet that was not his. He pulled the picture frame and the broken watch case from his coat. "Miss Alvarez," he said, "I grabbed these. I'll get them to her in the morning." Mara took the frame. A boy with a lopsided smile looked out from under a cap. Pride, hers and Miss Alvarez's, rose to meet him. Then she reached for the watch case. She popped it open. Inside, under a cracked plastic lens, was not a watch at all, but a pressed clover browned with age, and a photograph of a man and a woman, and a tiny baby wrapped like a burrito. The man's face had that gentle humor some men are born with. The woman looked like a storm that had been convinced to sit a while. Between them, the baby's fist was a star. Mara's breath left her. She stared, then shook her head once violently, as if to dislodge recognition. "What?" Dan asked, alarm high in his throat. She ran her thumb over the man's face, then flipped the case over. The back had the faint ghost of an engraving, worn down by years of jacket pockets. She took it to the lamp, turned the shade with a tenderness that made him ache. The letters emerged shyly in the light. HJR. Dan felt the floor tilt. "Where did she get this?" he asked. Too fast. He knew those initials. He'd held them in his hand all day. Could this be? Mara's eyes rose slowly to his. "Tell me your father's name," she said, and there was no good way out of the sentence. What she said next would shatter everything Dan thought he knew, and change the fight for North Pine forever. You'll hear it in part 2. You won't believe what happens next. Drop a comment for part 2, and get ready for the biggest twist yet.